Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we are here every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time and 1 p.m. on the East Coast, which is, I think, where my guest is, right? You're on the
I
East
am
Coast
with
these
Savannah
days?
on the East Coast, yes.
There you go. Yeah. And for those of you who are regular viewers of the show, you probably recognize this lady. She was my guest a few weeks ago, and we had an amazing conversation about the sort of early to kind of mid part of her life. This is Vanessa Donaldson, and I'm going to do a brief recap if I can, and correct me if I'm wrong. See how my memory is, right? Vanessa started out life. Her father was an American. Her mother was German, and her father was in the diplomatic service, which is how he met her mother. And after they got married, he was posted to Africa, which is where you were born, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cameroon, West Africa. Very good.
Yeah. And so throughout her young life, Vanessa, traveled from place to place as her father went from post to post. Eventually, came back here to the United States, primarily on the East Coast, as I recall, and grew up there. Went to college, and after college, joined the Peace Corps, if you can imagine, and sort of took on a bit of that nomadic life on her own. And you were in the Sahel, right? In the Peace Corps, as I recall.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Niger is how you pronounce, or Niger, but above Nigeria. It's a different country. People always like
right.
to lump it together, but Niger, West Africa, in the Sahel Desert.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it was there that she met the man who at the time was in the Marine Corps, on embassy duty, as I recall, and he ended up being posted to Italy, and so Vanessa left the Peace Corps and moved to Italy and got a job in the consulate there, right?
Let me correct. I didn't just leave. I extended in the
Oh,
Peace Corps first. I did 2 years, and then I extended another 6 months, was supposed to be a year, to be a volunteer leader and move
oh,
into a
that's right.
city and be in charge. I want to say I didn't just quit and leave. I almost lost my husband because during that time we had a $200 phone call. That's what my paycheck was, with him asking me, "Where are you? Aren't you coming?" And I said, "I just got this promotion thing, and I'm staying another 6 months." And he said, "What am I doing waiting for you in Italy for? This is ridiculous." So that's a big thing. Did not leave, extended, and then made my way, wrote a
There
postcard
you
to my
go.
mom, met a Marine, fell in love with a Marine, moving to Rome, and then that's where Rome ended up.
And so then you were in Rome, and you became quite the habitu of gosh, I'm going up Rome. What is Rome's nickname? Paris is the city of light. Rome has a
Oh,
name like that. I can't think of what it is now.
city of
Uh,
love for me. I don't know.
oh,
City
okay.
of love for me.
But then eventually, you and your husband came back here to the United States, and I think that's sort of where we kind of
Yes.
left off with
The
your story.
boyfriend, the boyfriend. We came
Or
back, did a
boyfriend,
courthouse wedding, had a baby, went right to the base and got a military ID, dependent ID,
right?
and started that journey in the Marine Corps as a spouse.
Right. So after the last show, Vanessa and I decided she needed to come back and kind of pick up her story, now as a what we call in the military a MILSPOUSE, which is an acronym basically, or a shorten anyway, of military spouse. And by the way, for the longest time I could not figure out what MILSPOUSE was. And
It's
so then
okay.
I don't,
You're male.
because I was like, Mills Pouse, what is,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and I purposely use that title because that's my people. Those are my women I hang out with. So if you don't quite get the acronym in the name, then maybe that's not, we're not the right fit to work with either and stuff. So Guild Spouse, it's a very unique, yeah, acronym.
Yeah, and
You
and
guys have an acronym. You guys have acronyms for everything in the military. We want to have one
everything.
too.
Yeah, yeah, and one of the interesting things is you'll see um, programs, etc., that are designed to help veterans, military people, but you actually see not very much that's specifically for military spouses, which is a little bit strange in this day and age because um, anyone who's been in the military knows that um, if you have a family, um, your spouse in many ways has a much more difficult life than the service member, him or herself. A service member's life is pretty straightforward. Like, this is what you do. But a military spouse is sort of, you have to be a jack of all trades, and you're left on your own for long periods of time. So but rather than me talking about, so tell us, let's start by talking about, kind of without maybe going through each duty station, what were the challenges that you faced as a military spouse, and more importantly, how did you overcome them? Because I think that's really the foundation for what you're doing now.
Yeah. Okay, so the challenges, to wrap it up, because we could go on for 5 hours probably with Vanessa on here. The challenge, well, first, starting off as a military spouse without a background was one challenge in itself. I had my dad who served in the Army, but he passed away when I was 19 in college. So I never got to have those conversations with him. We went to his funeral. He died of a heart attack. And I saw a flag getting folded and handing to my mom. And I said, why is dad getting a flag? What is this? Well, yeah, he served in the Army, a little stint. Well, that's kind of big information. So I didn't know what it was like to grow up with that. I don't have a long legacy of, my dad did and my grandparent. So it was all kind of new and foreign to me. So joining the military community, I found that as soon as I was the spouse, we got settled quickly in Camp Pendleton, California, after we took the baby in the Ryder truck and drove cross country and emptied my mom's house out. And after a few months of training, we said, all right, babe, I'm going to be going off to this deployment thing, and I'll be back. And I literally said, a D what? What are you doing? What's this training? And he said, deployment. He uses the word, he knows what he'd signed up for. I didn't know what I signed up for. And I'm like, so he had to spell it out. This is, a pre-Googling everything. I said, what is a deployment? What is that? Can you explain that more? He's like, yeah, I got to, hop on the ship in San Diego, and I'll be like floating around in the Persian Gulf. We're going to do some donuts, and then we'll be back. Like, it was all just in one sentence. And I'm like, but I'm home with a baby, and are we going to be able to communicate? So yeah, that was my introduction to the military. Learning, it was like trial by fire, and just, that was a challenge, having to move around and always seeing, wow, my husband gets to go to work. I was happy for him. He went to work. He had a mission. He had a job to do. He had an entire network of people to work with. Mm-hmm. So you're like completely built into a community wherever you guys go. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to create my own space here. I'm the spouse. Like, they don't immediately put us all in a room together and say, let's have a kumbaya spouse session, everybody get together, and who's your husband with? And, there's a lot of drama that goes on with that too, if you're different ranks and fraternization, and you can't hang out with everybody. So there was, a lot of alone time and figuring it out really quickly. Like, how am I going to survive on my own with a baby, keep it going? And my husband kind of comes and goes. Like, this is the lifestyle. There's got to be more than this. I got to make purpose out of this. I got to be positive. And so the challenges were about moving around and having to find my own path every time. It had to do with the job placement movement. When he first deployed, the very first deployment was really rough. It was my first time away from him that long, after we just, had this crazy love affair going on in the middle of the Sahel Desert, and then off to Rome, Italy, and we're zipping around at the Tower of Piazza and throwing coins in the Trevi fountain, and all of a sudden, we couldn't even get onto the military base in California at first because there was a wait list. I didn't know about that either. I thought you just move on a base wherever you go. I'm like, there's a wait list? Well, yeah, it's a really popular spot. People want to get to Camp Pendleton. So it took us a year to live in town and to move on base. So it was challenging to change jobs every time. I realized, oh my gosh, I have to start a new job again, which is something I do in my coaching too. Like, I can prep those active duty spouses on thinking about their career they're going to go into and where they want to allocate their time, if they want to monetize, if they want to be part-time, full-time, because some jobs are more transferable when you move around, and other jobs, like you're just starting from scratch again. So my resume, I say, is, very colorful. And if you're not in the military, I just look like a job hopper. They're like, wow, this girl can't keep a job. She is moving every 2 to 3 years, completely different fields. I've done government work. I've worked for Centers for Disease Control overseas in Trinidad and Tobago. I've worked for American Business Group. I've worked for a private training company with the United Arab Emirates Sheikhs. Like everything was in Arabic, and I was like the American liaison. So I've done all kinds of colorful jobs. I've had, like you said, jack of all trades, just like, here we go, let me find something. But I do find some spouses, hey, they go maybe into the medical field, become like a hygienist or something. There have been many places I moved, and I'll find a military spouse, and I'm like, oh, that was smart. She found a transferable job. So when her husband moves, she can keep doing what she's doing in that medical field. So yeah, things to think about when you're, becoming a military spouse. The job moving around it's a challenge. Some places, like when we got to Hawaii, I did the math, and for me to put my kids in daycare to go work was more expensive than me just to stay home. So I joined Melaleuca, did more network marketing, my own schedule. I was like, I'm not putting my kids in a daycare and paying money and then and then having a job and putting my entire paycheck into a daycare system. That's not going to work for me. So yeah, finding your way that way, being alone, finding your network, moving around with the jobs, thinking about transferable jobs if you have something like that, or starting your own business. There are some military resources for MILSPOUSEs online to help spouses start businesses. There are grants out there. There's camaraderie and support you can tap into, so that you can also be in a group of like-minded people that are moving around like you, that have that lifestyle of transition, that can understand you, and they get you. You don't need to go through that background, just to help you on, how to do your business plan. What does this look like? Are you selling a product or a service? So all those types of things come out when the longer you stay in the military. I've been married 27 plus years now to my Marine. I know somebody else interviewed me. They're like, you call him my Marine. I'm like, I'm really proud of that. Like, I own him like it's a piece of property. I joke years ago, oh my gosh, I would say I was the mistress. I didn't really say my Marine, because I felt like the military owned him. The military had priority. Where are we going? What are we doing? He needs to check in and do scheduling and sign in and out with them, not the wife. So I used to joke that I'm the mistress. I'm like, okay, you going to work to your first bride tonight? Yeah. And then coming home, and I was just the mistress on the back end, like, hey, I'm between deployments. Here I am. Let's have another baby. And then he goes off again. So yeah, my Marine. I like to affectionately say that now, because he is kind of all mine. I don't have to share him with the military anymore. So those are challenges. And then overcoming, I would just say the forefront of everything, my foundation for me has been my faith. If I had not tapped into a local church, places I've been, and tapped into powerful mentoring Christian women that could lead me and guide me and give me support, I really don't know where our marriage would be, because over 50, 60% of military marriages end in divorce. I didn't want to be a statistic. And I just remember this moment of pushing my stroller down the street in San Clemente. We're somewhere in downtown San Clemente, which you might have been to since you're in LA. And thank God for those evangelists. This woman approached me with a flyer. And, what do we do when people have flyers? We're usually abort mission, run. You don't even, in this day and age, you don't even put your hand out, but this was in the mid 90s. And I was still a little open, not worried that someone's going to attack me or what's going on. So I'm with the stroller, and she just passed a flyer, and I had the choice. I could have ignored her. I could have looked away. I could have thrown it right in the trash without reading it. But for some reason, and I call it divine God intervention or whatever, I picked up this flyer, and it was an invitation to a tiny little church that was meeting right there at the edge of North Beach. So by the casino, if you've ever gone to events by the San Clemente Casino, right across there, they have like a wedding hall, they have a performance area there, and a swimming pool. It's like a little clubhouse. And they would meet on the top floor. They got permission to have this little church set up on the top floor every Sunday. And I went home with that flyer, and all I could think was, I need God. I can't do this alone. My husband's getting ready to deploy. He's going to be gone for 6 to 8 months or something. I cannot do this alone. So it's kind of my initial surrendering. I grew up Catholic and went through the the rituals. I would
Mhm.
even taught catechism, I think, at one point in high school. It was like another friend and I, we were the two youngest like volunteers, and they loved to send all the kids to us because we were closer to their age group. We were like the elderly doing this, out of a nursing home or something. We were like younger and we were engaging. We had activities. So yeah, helping people with catechism for communion, went through that. And I do appreciate the Catholic tradition with the structure and the organ music. When you go in there, like when we're traveling, I love to go into like a church around a holiday or whenever, just for prayer, and hear someone playing that organ music with all of the pedals and the sound. And then you add, choir for a holiday, and it's like angelic.
Mhm.
So yeah, this was not that church. It was just in a little clubhouse, but that's okay. Our worship was actually on a tape recorder, and the pastor and his wife ran it. He was the pastor, and his wife helped with the worship. And she literally, worship time, she hit play on it with a cassette player. Remember those guys? Cassette.
Uh-huh.
And we would hit play and we'd sing that way. But, it didn't matter, because when you're communing, it doesn't matter, what the setting. The point is to connect with your source, with your God. And the view that we had was like the Pacific Ocean with windows all around. So it was a pretty magical spot. And I had to go home and have that conversation with my husband too, and say, so, you're deploying, we haven't really had a regular church attendance as we've been dating and tromping around the world. It's time to get serious. We have a baby now. Like, can we please go and check this church out? Like, that was kind of the convert. And he was like, yes, let's do it. I mean, thank God I didn't have to convince. He grew up Methodist. I didn't have to convince. So we ended up there. And on the weekends, every Sunday, the mothers would take turns in the childcare too. So if you had a kid, and maybe if you didn't even have a kid, but if you had a kid, you were definitely on the childcare roll system. So we all took one Sunday a month, and we were downstairs with the kids doing the daycare and doing their little Bible study.
Mhm.
But that foundation was instrumental in my spiritual growth, my self growth. I ended up getting rebaptized, saved, again, because I got baptized as a little baby in the Catholic
Yeah.
church, with the
Mhm.
sprinkle. But this was my first time stepping into the water, like, John the Baptist was doing with people. Just watched the whole series of The Chosen. So it's all fresh in my head. I was in the Pacific Ocean. I had my daughter dedicated. We had our daughter dedicated before he left. And then I was pregnant with our son now. And I remember getting baptized, it was like, I felt like I was getting like the bonus package, because I'm in the water with my baby in my tummy. And I'm like, oh, let's get both of us on this track. And he took me under the water and back. And that was when I really rededicated my life to God and said, I'm going to try to follow your ways and, honor you and all that. So, and I did that. I don't think my husband was there. And that was kind of a trigger point, because he came back and it was such a big momentous event in my life. It's like, I got baptized, I got dedicated. Things happen in these 3-6 month spans, and you just miss them. Life goes on.
Right.
And there's only so much you can put in letters. We weren't doing email much by then. We tried on one ship, the Essex. They tried to do email, but one guy used the email the wrong way, and the entire ship went on lockdown. That was it. So I was like, oh, great, there goes that communication.
River
But he
City.
came back and said, you got baptized without me? Like, that was the first time. I was like, well, and I tried to explain, well, we come into this world alone and we leave alone. I mean, and I'm happy to do it again with you. We can set that up and I'll go in 100. I don't care. But yeah, I felt a calling and I got in the water. And he's like, it just took him a little, like, that was a big moment, almost like a wedding type date that he wasn't there for. He's like, you did that without me? I'm like, yes, I felt the calling and I jumped in the ocean. So since then we have, gotten baptized together again. That was important for both of us. So we've done that, but that was the foundation. So I knew wherever I would move, whatever was thrown at us, whatever challenge was coming our way, I felt like, we're going to overcome, because we're going to lean on God. We're going to lean on community from spiritual churches and Bible-based spiritual churches, and take it from there. It was that same church that helped me, as an example, when my husband did deploy. So the first deployment, I was very scatterbrained, I don't know what I'm doing with myself. I'm looking at this baby. It was just like, the fog of war. It was a blur. And that's why I call it in, my little book we can talk about later, the back end battlefield. It was like, I felt like I was in a battlefield on the back end and no one could see it. Even if there's resources and stuff on base, it was just shocking. And I think I spent a lot more time going to the wine store, grabbing wine. I was sitting with another spouse, and she noticed. She said, she gave me a gift, and she gave me the wine stoppers. And I'm like, what's that for? Because I'm just having my pity party crying and I miss my husband. she was such a great mentor. She was 2 steps ahead of me. She had been through deployments. Our husbands deployed together, so that's nice. Connecting with women, that's another tip I have. Connect with women when your husbands are deployed. Don't be going to the bars and hanging out with the men, but connect with the women and be support there for each other. And she actually became, what's her name? Jill Boudreau. She became mayor for a little town next to like Puget Sound, somewhere in Washington. We've seen her since then. But this is the kind of, level of leadership that these women go out and do after their spouse. She became mayor and like re-upped like 4 rounds or 3 rounds. Finally, she's retiring from that. But yeah, she brought me these wine stoppers. And I said, what's that? She's like, well, I've noticed, when we're having wine, like you're like kind of going through the whole bottle almost. Like, you can save some of it and drink it tomorrow too, or the next day. And I said, well, it's not going to taste right then. And my husband's not here to share it with me. And she said, yeah, that's why we have these stoppers. So you can suck all the air out. And it was like the best little gift. So, and that's where I realized I can't keep going down this path every time he deploys. This is not going to end well for me and my health and my well-being. So by the second round of deployment, again, something got put in the mailbox. I don't know how I saw it. It ended up in the trash. I reached down, picked it up, and it was to start continuing education. So I had my college degree, but it was for the local education center on base. And I crumpled it up at first, threw it away. And then I was like, well, what did I just throw away there? Just like that other flyer that came to me. And I'll never forget Barbara with the church flyer and then that pamphlet. It's like seared in my mind. I said, what's this education thing? And I brought up my husband. He's like, yeah, maybe. Yeah, go back to school, work on something while I'm gone. And I'm like, you know what? I should. That would be a much more positive way to spend my time, going back to school, focused on education for something and not sitting at home having a pity party, just sharing my bottles of wine with my spouses. So I went and talked to the office and I was very, not confident, just like, what am I getting into? Even though I had a bachelor's degree, but I just didn't know what I was getting into. And she was just the calmest, sweetest lady, was like, we can do this. Your husband's going to be gone, but these are the courses. This is what's coming up. What do you want to focus on? We'll get you into the program. At that point, they didn't have as many grants and stuff for the spouses. So I would bring my checkbook to every 3 weeks, we had a new course. And the vets were all like, it's all covered under the GI. I'm covered. They would smirk and rock and I'm like writing a check. I remember it was like 1,000 something every time. Like, why am I writing this check? This is ridiculous. So yeah, I did that. And I didn't think I could do this course, but that church came in handy because they said, oh, you want to go back to school? We will help watch your daughter while you have night school and while you have classes. And I thought, this is a powerful church. It didn't have to be a mega Joel Osteen out of Texas. This is
right.
5 or 6 families communing together. And I'm like, you all would do that? You're going to help watch my daughter so I can go to class? Like, yes, that's what we're here for. That's what church does. That's what we do. We fellowship and we support each other. And I'll never forget that group. And they would take my daughter every Friday night and Saturday all day, like whenever I had class, and I would rotate them around the families and they would just pluck Malika in there with their kids and keep going. And I was able to do that. So I think I was in school for about a year and a half. So 6 months of that time while my husband was away, they were helping. And then he came home and then there was that shift of, what do you mean you have to leave all the time? I'm like, you got the kid duty, I got class. So, yeah, I would encourage, work on, a trade skill, something you're passionate about, something you're excited to do. I ended up doing administration, a Master of Science in Administration, MSA, because I like organizing things on the computer and flow charts and, organizational structure of how companies are set up and all that stuff. So that's what I went for. So yeah, that is something that has stuck with me, the keeping the faith, building that network of Christian supporters, and then being open to, wherever you go, don't look at it as a downside or a negative thing. My coaching background is also in positive intelligence. So you just look at everything as a gift or an opportunity. The worst thing can be going on. You're like, oh my gosh. I mean, we bought a house in Florida and ended up with Hurricane Ian, soon after. That's pretty negative, not fun, not, things out of our control all the time. But we actually stayed. Well, and the reason we stayed was because years before we were in Hurricane Katrina in Texas and my husband was gone. So I've already been through a hurricane alone with 2 kids. So when people were just going crazy in the media and get on the roads, and then I was like, you know what? I've been through this before. I went through the side of getting on the road in the middle of August in Texas. Imagine that heat with everybody gridlocked. I mean, I was 20 minutes from the airport and it took like 2 hours to get there. It was crazy. And then, it was just gridlock. And then you would look out, it looked like a war zone. When you looked out of your window, you saw dead horses, dead dogs, diapers. That's like what I remember, because ACs were going off in cars. They literally had horses that were dying of overheat exhaustion, the dogs, and then the baby diapers. So that was my vision of the Hurricane Katrina. It took 2 hours to get to some place. You know, a friend said, come stay with me out of the zone or whatever, because things were starting in Galveston, and they really thought it would have a ripple effect all the way to Houston.
Right.
And I was set. I had my waters filled in the bathtubs. I had canned food in the bathtubs, in the bathrooms. I had sleeping bags, pillows. I was ready to hunker down with my kids in a bathroom. But then I had my mother and my husband, emotional ears. Get out, get out, get out. They're watching stuff on the news. My mom from Germany, my husband from California training. He was trying to get me out with the kids on like one of the last planes, and we didn't make it. Like, they shut down the airport. That was it.
Right.
So all this emotional drama of, you got to get out. We got it. So I loaded up the car and did it for them, and just ended up crying on the freeway for like 20 hours. And my phone wasn't charging. The juice was dying. My husband kept calling like, oh, where are you now? And I'm like, my phone's dying and I'm not where. We got to this friend's house who I knew, and we ended up in like a shack with a tin roof. It was louder in her house than in my solid brick house. I got bit by fire ants. That whole episode. So when he looked at me and said, would you like to leave or stay? When Hurricane Ian came by, I'm like, we will stay and go down with the ship. We'll go down with the house. So we sat there, you know, it was personal decision. Some left, some stayed. I didn't want to be stuck on bridges getting, you know, flooded and all that. And we stayed to the point of watching. We didn't know what a hurricane impact window was, but we do now, because we watched that window. It literally like goes with the wind and bows, and it would bow more and more. We got up to, I forgot what the category is. We were category 4. Technically, I think it should have been a 5 based on the numbers that were popping up. But I think for insurance reasons, whatever, you know, keep it a 4. Like, put less money out. I don't know. But watching that window bowing, and we were there in the eye of the storm. Port Charlotte was actually in the eye of the storm.
Wow.
But yeah, we survived that. And what do I do with that information? Yeah, it was breath work. It was staying calm. My husband was running in and out of the house trying to move branches. Fences were flying all over. We actually were in church praying the weekend before, like, whoever's staying, we're hunkering down. God bless you all. Protect these houses. I mean, the pastor was just having a prayer vigil. And ironically enough, after the hurricane, our fence was the only one still standing in like the whole neighborhood. Crazy. We had fence flying from neighbors, whatever. And we run our place like an Airbnb too. So all those hits started straight away. Hey, we're bringing pets. Is your fence standing? We saw what's going on in your area. I said, please keep on coming. The fence is standing. Now it is leaning a little bit. It does need some work, but it's still standing. So yeah, doing all those, using all those skills that you learn from being so flexible with this military journey as a spouse, it gives you strength to like overcome these types of challenges. I would call myself for years the Semper Gumby wife. You know, I mean, the Marines have Semper Fi, everything is Semper Fi out there. And I'm like, well, I'm a Semper something. So I'm like, I'm Semper Gumby wife, because I'm all Gumby. Remember that? Was that from the 80s, that little Gumby thing?
Oh, no. That's from way like the 50s or earlier. Yeah. Well, Gumby and Pokey. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it still has they still had some characters that were floating around there in the 80s or the 70s still. But yeah, Gumby, like super flexible, stretchy thing.
Right. That's all over the military, at least all over the sea services. Because I know when I went through officer training, I used to hear that, and Semper Gumby, always Gumby, you know? Which is essentially what that means.
Yeah,
you know, like, okay, always be the sort of weird looking guy with a pony.
Green, right? Well, I remember like
he was green, yeah, and Pokey was orange.
Yeah, so hopefully I've evolved from the green blob, but Gumby in the sense of being stretchable, being flexible, being just open to what's next, and looking at everything as a gift and opportunity.
It's interesting because I suspect that your experience is very similar to many spouses' experiences. I know that I mean, when I was in the Navy, I was married, and I know the first deployment I went on. You know, I left behind my wife and our daughter, who at the time was 3 years old, I think she was. And we were on a naval air station, Lemoore Naval Air Station, which is essentially a fighter squadron base, right? And the naval aviation is a very cliquish community. So if you are the wife of what we call the pointy noses, which are the fighter jets, right? So you consider yourself to be on the top of the heap. So if there's a wife whose husband is in air ACC log wing, air command and control, and they fly prop planes, right? So you're not as good, right? And they won't associate with you. So interestingly enough, my commanding officer, he was a naval flight officer, but he was an air command and control guy. And so when we went on deployment, his wife, who was the commanding officer's wife, the other fighter pilots' wives didn't want to hang out with her. So she and my wife created a kind of a small group that then, they built that support around, the two of them. And I mean, it was really funny because I would go and see my CO on the boat from time to time, and he'd regale me with stories of things that his wife told me that she and my wife had done, to sort of, and she was sort of leading the way because, at that point she'd been through, I don't know, half a dozen, 8 deployments, and this was the first one that my wife had gone through. So it was quite interesting. And before that, when we were in Okinawa, so although we were Jewish and there weren't very many Jews on Okinawa, as you might imagine, there were very strong Christian communities there. And I because I was a chaplain, so I knew a number of the other chaplains, and I got to know, some of their wives a little bit. And when my wife showed up, I mean, it was shell shock because she showed up. Gosh, she was about 7 months pregnant. It was just before she was not allowed to fly. We had 2 dogs who had been flown in just prior to her getting there. And she's in the military environment, but also overseas in a foreign country. And I'm working, at least 10 to 12 hours a day. Right. And so I was almost never there. And a couple of the women took her under their wings and really made her part of a small community there. It really was a faith community. And it was very rewarding for her, I think, to feel part of this community of women leading God-centered lives. Because that was important to us, and even though we didn't share denominationally the same faith, yet our perspective was very similar. And one of the things and this is I think one of the lessons I suspect you would agree with this is, in the military, you learn to build your community. So you have the benefit of being part of this sort of large, almost fraternity, if you will. But even so, it's too big to provide the kind of support that we need. But what you learn is very quickly to build a small group around yourself, and that's how you survive. And it's interesting because I don't see that a whole lot in civilian life in the same way, because the communities that are built in the military, they're very supportive in a positive way. So it's not, women going out and getting hammered every day and that kind of stuff. I mean, not to say that they don't go out or do whatever. Of course they do, but that's not the main. The main focus is like you were saying about yourself, sustaining a healthy life, physically, mentally, spiritually, and it certainly can be done. But I think it's probably harder to do in civilian life, but it can be accomplished in civilian life too.
Hmm.
So so let's, if we're a little over halfway through this hour already. So let's shift and talk about now what you're doing in civilian life, because I have a feeling it dovetails onto what I was just saying.
Yeah, yeah, it does. When you talked about building that community, it just brought back memories too. When we did move on the base at Camp Pendleton, we were in a cul-de-sac. So that was my community. It was like where we were enlisted side, so we had duplexes attached. So two, four, six, probably 8 homes. And that was my go-to. We could knock on each other's door for anything if we needed help with, hey, can you watch my kid? I need to run here.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I'm out of eggs or whatever. There was that sense of community that you don't get. And that's something that I think military spouses miss when we do leave. You said we have a lot of similarities, if whether I'm speaking or another military spouse. I was just on a podcast yesterday, and it was like 4 or 5 of us, and it was unbelievable when people were sharing, piggybacking off one story after another. It was like, oh my gosh, it was so much in common.
Yeah.
So yeah, how do I bring that into my current state of being a retired military spouse? That transition, when my husband got out, I get it. He served 22 plus years in the Marine Corps. He was not at all interested in filling out. We went through that TAPS class, that 3-day, transitional assistance program. And, they let the wives pepper in here and there, or maybe I clawed my way in, like, I want to see what they're talking about. I'm getting out too. I want to learn something.
Right. It
But
is I have to interject here. And I've been talking about this for years. It is amazing to me that there is no transition assistance program for family members, as if the only one who's transitioning is the service member. It's really kind of mind-boggling on a certain
right,
level,
right.
right?
Yeah, and I think we spoke in another pocket, maybe when I was interviewing you about, needing this transition to start maybe 3 years before you get out. And there's
Mm-hmm.
resources out there now
Right.
with vets that are doing that, because they realize a one weekend, fire hose drill is not going to get you prepared, all the way from getting your medical charts prepped for your VA disability claim to where you're moving to resources for employment, everything. It's like a 3-year window, so you can
Mm-hmm.
ease into it, So, but the TAPS thing, that's what they'd offer. I don't know if it's called that now, but I remember joining the resume building day and the job placement, and it was just dry, and like, everybody bring your resume in, and they like were trying to look over it, and then they did mock interviews, standing up, taking turns presenting, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on here. So we all leave in this blur, and my husband was like done. He was not about to go get a job. He said, I'm never going to answer yes, sir, to anybody again. Those were his words when he came home. And then I mentioned how he was home and I was going to work, and the kids are like, is dad ever leaving the house again? And I was like, so I asked, are you going to get a job again? Like, what are you thinking? He's like, I'm never answering sir to anybody. I'm like, no, dad's not leaving the house. He will be home, guys. Just get comfortable with your new normal. So, so that transition for me, once he got out, there was kind of a panic, like, oh my gosh, that military, even like our insurance, everything was going to go on to the retired side, not on active duty. Our premiums were going to go up, like everything was going to change. So I said, well, what if I go back to work and he stays home? And I thought, okay, we had this conversation. He was kind of like, yeah, if you want to go work, go for it. I'll stay home. I was like, okay, but you got to be in charge of the kids' pickup schedule and all that. So we had that transition, and I applied and got a job at a solar company that was out of El Toro, Irvine area.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still in all the Costco, Sunrun it's called. So I helped build them up before they went public. I helped train all their people. I was, they said they hired me for my customer service. I got employee of the month. I was helping, like, keeping track of 200 plus people getting solar on their roof and making sure they had personal attention and not left behind. And then after all that, we doubled in size. We went public, and then they laid me off because I had trained all these young kids that could take my job and pay for 3 people instead of 1. So that was kind of, fast forward, that was kind of the triggering point that said, I'm kind of overworking for people and investing all that time and energy being away from my family and then getting laid off. So I did that. My husband was so happy the day I came home with my box, crying. Like, I just went to the work office and they said, okay, pack up your box, you're out. Like, that's how layoffs go usually. They don't give you like a whole booklet, like, now the next week we're going to bring you in the office. And it is a shocker, and nobody likes to feel thrown aside and, you washed up, used up, whatever.
Right.
So I came home with that box, and they gave me a little $2,000 or $3,000 severance check or something. And my husband was so happy. He's like, I have my wife back, because I was putting in like 10 to 12 hours, I think. I was coming in early, staying late, hiding with the laptop in the bathroom on the weekend. And he's like, you're not the CEO. This is crazy.
Right.
So when I came home with my box crying, he was like, where's that severance? Did they give you a check? All right. I mean, I was still crying. I'll never forget. He took that mobile phone thing, he clacked on. He's like, all right. My daughter had just come home from college. He's like, you're in charge of the house, take care of the dogs and the son. I'm taking mom off. And off we went and had a weekend like retreat. So that's how that went down. But over time, and then working for myself, there's a lot of fog, there's a lot of blur, but it built me to the place where I am today. And after retirement, with my husband staying home and then me going to work, now we're both home together. We started a boating ministry. I noticed for him, going to the ocean was his therapy, ocean therapy. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
So after a year of fishing off a paddleboard out of the Pacific, he actually, he got one little check from the military and said, do you mind if I buy myself a little fishing boat? I'm like, please get off that paddleboard and get yourself protected. Because I'm literally going to work every day wondering, is my husband coming home tonight? He's on a paddleboard with the sharks in the ocean. Of course, Marine, he thinks he's invincible. Women would send me pictures like, oh, we were at lunch at the Fisherman's Pier. Look what we saw at the end. And they're sending me a photo of my husband. It was a red paddleboard, very noticeable, right off the water. Like, yep, I'm like, okay, he's paddleboarding off the pier today. Okay, got it. So when he said he was getting a fishing boat, I said, go for it. And then I tried to go on there. And the first boat was like a 14-footer. It was a little small for me with those ocean waves in California. And I spent more time hanging over the boat, throwing up, getting seasick. It was like, honey, I can't do this. And it was like, this is his dream now, and I can't be a part of it. But he moved up. We ended up with a 21-foot Parker fishing, which he loves now. And I watched him go fishing. He would take me out there on my own. And then I realized, I said, this is such a good thing. We have to share this with our veterans. Like, we can't just keep this to ourselves. And the church upbringing, it's like, hey, if there's something, you have a light, you shine it. So, of course, there's all those dream killers, they call them. I heard that term the other day, or negative Nellies, like, what? Bring foreigners on your boat? Bring total strangers? I mean, these guys are medicated. What if they slash your throat and they're going to have a slip and fall? I mean, people had an excuse for everything with why this wouldn't work. But, being the positivity person I am, I'm like, I'm not listening to all that. We'll have a little waiver that they can e-sign saying, okay, you're on our boat. We're not liable. That's all I can do.
Right.
And it was the most amazing experience. I just started with the women around me. Like you said, the networking, building your community. I had military spouses that had kids that were at the high school. And when they started sharing with me that their husband came back from deployment and they were on meds and they don't leave the room and the shades are closed and they're totally depressed. And, that's the say was, would they like a boat ride? Can we get them out on a boat, maybe for some fresh air with the family, just to change the scene a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
And their eyes would light up like, okay, I'll go ask. And next thing, we were setting up dates. I brought caregivers on the boat, like all those spouses that are taking care of their 100% service disabled vets that like literally they can't even function without their wives doing a schedule, like that level. It took like half a year, I think, to schedule that boat ride because someone was always like, nope, my husband needs me, can't make it. But when we took them out and I got those little thank you cards back, just thanking me and just simple handwriting, like what it meant for their family, that's when I realized this was needed. We're onto something and we're going to keep doing it. So we did that for about 3 years. And then thank God my husband was on board. The vets would get on ship with him, on the boat. And then they would end up in the cuddy cabin with my husband. So they have all this like veteran camaraderie talk. Mm-hmm. And then I was more in the back with the wives and the kids. I had local communities sponsoring stuff. So one lady would show up with donuts and coffee for us if it was a morning thing. I just literally walked into small businesses, said, hey, I'm taking out veterans. Would you like to be a part of it? Jimmy John's, I think there was a new Jimmy John's that had opened up. So no problem. He said, made me like 5 or 10 sandwiches for our outing. And I took it on the boat. And so the community can get involved too. So we did that. And then I said, well, why doesn't he do fishing charters? We'll call it Fishing with a Purpose, because he's already spent all this money for his captain's licensing. He went to the Maritime Institute in San Diego to learn even how to do plot charting and stuff like that. I mean, he literally told me, like, you're a distraction. Like, can you tell if I'm in the space with him? You should see us together. Like, we make things happen, but it's fun and chaotic. So he's like, I need to focus on this school thing. I'm moving into the barracks in San Diego and I'm doing this thing for 2 weeks and I'm getting it done, back to school mode. And I'm like, what?
With this.
We haven't been apart in a while. Like, what do you mean you're going to leave me for 2 weeks? This is too much. And I'm thinking, like, Vanessa, remember, you would be gone for 9 to 10 months apart. You can do this.
Right.
So that was funny. I was like, panicked, like, leave me for 2 weeks. So he went and did that. He got all these certifications before we even, started taking people out. And then we added on the fishing charters. And after 3 years, we actually built something like on Google. People were calling us a couple, 2, 3 times a month. Hey, we're coming from Alabama. We're veterans, or we read that you're veterans. You serve veterans. We want to fish on your boat. You're Christian. We don't want any craziness on the boat. Like, we have kids. We want to come fish with you. So this whole thing evolved. And by like year 4, then the pandemic, like shut us down overnight. And that's where the regrouping came for, we happened to rent our house out, found a used Sprinter van, and off we went into the sunset and started the van life journey. So with that, I started to do a lot of self-growth. Everything was shut down. You couldn't go to restaurants. Nobody was communicating. Everybody was isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I had some work to do on myself, because I still was living with that mindset, that mentality of being a dependent. I bring back that story of getting married, the baby, the courthouse, and that dependent ID. That has been with me my whole almost adult life. I look at that card. It's a brown card. I might have changed color. I think it went white now. And every 3 to 5 years for the wives, you have to go and reapply to. I'm like, why can't I have mine as long as his 10, 20 years? They're like, well, statistically, the wives don't last. That's why they make you go in every 5 to 7 years to check a box. They're still married. In fact, we were camping in Alaska and Canada over the summer. Well, they sent that 7-year letter, I guess, to the vets that we didn't know was coming in the mail, asking if you're still married. So he never checked the box. We're off, fishing fishing in the Kenai Peninsula, trying to save ourselves from the bears that are trying to share our fish. It was a whole different world. And meanwhile, I'm dropped off the dependent ID thing. We come back, we're going through mail, and we see all the letters. Like, we tried, with one letter, really. Like in businesses, you call, you text, you try different ways, but one letter didn't check the box. I was out. So it took us 6 months. We had to get our Florida Congress or governor involved with VA support to try to get me back on. But I've been a dependent so long with that ID that it kind of made me fit into that mold of feeling small. Like, I'm just a dependent. Just tell me what to do, where to go. I don't have my own thoughts. I'm a dependent. I need to be dependent on something. I need to depend on my man. I need to be dependent on everything. And then through that growth and leaving the military, that's why I have the flower now too for my business, like helping military spouses bloom wherever they're planted, peeling like wallflower on the wall, peeling off, because we're not in the military anymore, guys. We can have a voice. We can stand taller. We can speak up. All those times, don't sit, no fraternization, whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. So going through that journey with my identity shift, it's like, what am I now? I still have that dependent ID, but I look at it differently, Kevin. I don't go everywhere looking at my ID going, I'm a dependent, and what can I get for free and all that. I'm looking at it as a resource. Gets me on the base, get me, save 2 cents on my milk, but I'm branching into being more independent. So in fact, I even just was in an article. I wrote an article for the military spouse. What was it called? Entrepreneur Guide. Oh. And the article I wrote about was all about having alone time, tips for alone time in a healthy military marriage. Mm-hmm. So I've been so dependent on my husband to the point where, our kids would see it too. And my daughter, as she got older, she would make comments like, wow, like, you don't really think much for yourself, and you just whatever dad wants to do. And now it's like, it's a shift. It's a little like he's meeting a new wife too now, because we're not on active duty anymore. So it's like, what's Vanessa getting into now? What's Vanessa up to? Like, even right now, he's like, what's your day? I'm like, I have this podcast. I'm doing this. He's like, I'm going fishing. So he's in the canal on a canoe doing what he loves. And I love being with him almost all the time. We're in tight spaces between the boat and the van life. It's great for marriage therapy, I'd say too. If you're having trouble with your spouse, do that. But, to have that tight space together, that's marriage building. That's learning how to work around each other in a tight space and keep the peace, all that. So, and I love to go fishing, hunting with him, all that. I mean, he taught me how to shoot with a bow and arrow. Haven't shot my own deer yet, but we've got venison filled from Ohio, from his brother's houses where they have property when we pass through there. And my husband's caught each one of those. We don't just kill stuff. I tell people too, like when he's fishing, if it's too small, he follows the rules. He throws it back in the water. Bow hunting, he prefers the bow hunting, not the easy shooting. Like, it's got to have a challenge and only go for the big bucks and leave the doe. And like, so I've learned his whole world, what sparks him and what he's excited about. And I love to meander in and out of it, but I don't need to do it 24/7 all the time. So it's the whole learning and expressing, communicating to him. Like, I have some things that I might want to do that, are maybe not with you all the time. And, like I want to go to this conference I went to, and I was away for a weekend, and this is new to him. Like my wife's just going to pick up and go, what is this? But I'm like, yeah, I'm creating my own independence from that dependent ID that's hung on to me my whole life. So that's led me to working with military spouses as a life coach, helping mentor them with their transition, because I'm 2 steps ahead of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've helped people either virtually or I meet people in person too. We were at a 4th of July, and she became a client for like about a year. She was not only female military veteran, but also a spouse. So she had both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had all kinds of trauma from her background that she was still working through. 2 abusive marriages with guys she married in the military,
Mm-hmm.
some officer who was what's fraternizing and almost like trying to rape the girls, like giving them ultimatums. If they didn't do this and that for him, they couldn't leave the base. So she didn't leave a base in one of her duty stations for months because she wasn't going to partake just to get liberty duty.
Right.
So I learned a lot about that through her, but we worked through that. She was attracting the wrong men in her life. So she's cleared so much of that stuff from the past. And it was just a blessing that I connected with her in that journey. Now she's also completed her medical certification. She wants to go, her big dream is to go back to Germany and work with DOD or something in the medical field, because she went there as a spouse years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Did not have a good experience. She was locked up again in her house. She was beaten. She had no connection with the community. It was just a horrible, horrible way to go to Germany and, experience a foreign country. So she wants in her big dream to go back there and recreate that scene and make it hers and own it and, do stuff in the medical world. So those are the kind of people that, end up working with and helping women with getting connected more to nature with their 5 senses because of the van life. We've done this for 5 years. It was supposed to start off as like 2 months in the van during the pandemic. My husband's like, we'll do this for a month or 2. We'll get settled. And almost a year later, the world was still on lockdown. So we had no rush to go anywhere. We almost settled in Montana briefly, but I'm like trying to remind him it's cold most of the year. It was August. We were there and the deer were passing through. We're watching sunsets down these valleys. And I'm like, it's really nice in August, honey. But no, I asked a local, how's it in the winter? She told me brutal. So yeah, moving on, not doing that. So we ended up in Florida as I call it our FOB, our forward operating base. So when people ask where we are, like we come and go maybe from Florida, and it could be across country. It could be, the Baja beaches of Mexico. My mom said, take me to Alaska before I die. So we got that in. But I have built in a business that I can move around with. I'm a digital nomad. I didn't really know what that word was before, but now I'm living it. So yeah, I'm nomadic, which you started off saying. I was in a nomad with even the State Department. And then I lived, Niger was actually, they have a book called The Nomads of Niger. And they're like this whole Tuareg group of people that literally live nomadic, and they have no home. They set up their tents wherever they go, and they take care of livestock and people in villages with all their agricultural needs as they're passing through. So that's kind of how they trade, going on people's property on land. They're taking care of things along the way, but they're the nomads. And I'm a digital nomad. We still have that life of movement around, but we create our own schedules. We have that freedom of movement. No one tells us where to go, what to do. And as long as I have my internet, my Starlink, whatever, I can set that up and I can empower other women. I'm building a whole building a community, like you say. I miss that camaraderie. And I noticed yesterday when we were talking with spouses, we missed that online space together where we can just share, support, vent, whatever. So I have that going and a wait list going for military spouses that want to join that community. I have a private Facebook group for military spouses where they can go and just have that space to connect where, nobody else can maybe understand their world. And then what I've added on with that too is I've noticed that the finances aren't really set up too. It's so sad when people get out of the military and they're working in Lowe's or wherever. I mean, I was meeting one lady on LinkedIn and I was like, can we set up a calendar call or whatever, Zoom call? And she wrote, it was heartbreaking. This is a woman who served in the military. And she said, no, I'm sorry. I'm working at the strip club tonight. I need to make money for my kid or whatever. Like, I don't have time to meet with you. And I'm like, working at the strip joint. So where women end up, I hear stories, they end up working at the night shift of the gas station, like maybe especially if they were female military veteran. These were veterans too. So they had trauma from there. And they don't, like she said, yeah, I like the night shift because I don't have to talk to people. I don't have to associate with anybody. It's quiet. So there's a reason that, our veteran females some of them are going into this path. but I want them to thrive and shine in retirement and, live their dream and find what works for them. And I've noticed with that financial side, what's missing too is the VA disability claim. So that's what I've mentioned to you before, and that's what I focus on a lot of my time with now, helping vets with their VA disability claim when they are stuck. I'm an affiliate for a company called ReMedical. We're very transparent. You can go Google it, whatever, see their reviews. And I'm an affiliate for them. And what we do is we help claims that already have service-connected disabilities, and we see if they qualify for a rating increase. So there's the initial claim process, like some vets have not even set up that paperwork. You can go to your American Legion, your VFW, maybe your local VSO office, get that initial claim going, and I'll do a complimentary consultation with any veteran to talk about where you are in that process. But get that claim going, get your intent to file date going, all this stuff. And then we help people that have service connected. So I collect some, crucial paperwork from them to it's like math. You're looking at the numbers. Okay, what's lining up? What can we maximize? What is already maxed out? And they have that phone call or Zoom call with me. We go over that. And then it's up to them if they want to continue the process alone. If they have an open claim, it's kind of hit or miss if we take them on. Sometimes we want the claim process to go through first, get that rating letter from the VA, decision letter, they call it, to see, did they get the increase? Did they get denied? And then take it up from there. Once in a while, we might do our claim along with the VA claim they've already had opened. But I've got testimonials. It's a process, but we're there to hold their hand, so they're not doing it alone. They helped my husband about 7 or 8 years. So I've been on the other side of this. That's why I'm such an advocate for it. They helped us through that process of clicking on the VA website, going deer in the headlights, like, where do you click? I have no idea what I'm looking at, just so much information. And they broke it down in baby steps, and they were on the phone with us on like a speakerphone. So the wife was included, and I could talk with them too, and the veteran. It was just a beautiful process. So that's why I'm working with ReMedical. And when they get to the other end, it's just rewarding to see them get that disability rating they were working on their own. Right now, I think the VA is about, they say like 5 to 7 years out when people are doing their own claims. And then you might get a denial. Imagine waiting 5 years, getting a denial letter, and then kind of starting over. So our process is maybe about 4 months or so. So, people can do it on their own and suffer and beat their head. In fact, I just got a text yesterday from a vet who was trying to beat his head against the wall, doing it himself. And he just wrote and said, can we talk? I'm done doing this alone. So yeah, we're going to reach out and make it happen for him, hopefully. But that's what I do. I help with veteran claims. I help with military spouses, either one-on-one or group setting. And it brings me joy to be a part of that in my local community. I just started volunteering with the Military Heritage Museum. I can see you loving that place, Kevin, if you ever come to Florida. It's filled from, they have gallery rooms filled from the Revolutionary War all the way to present times. Wow. So, of course, when I get to the present times, it shows pictures of soldiers that look like my husband with the desert camis, and they have the IED explosion blast, image stuff and tires. Like, I feel like I'm with him listening to all that stuff that went on there. So that's where I can tour people and have more input, because I was a spouse during that time. But everything is laid out from Revolutionary War on, and people donate the most amazing artifacts. We've even got weapons from Japan, Germany, France. I know where to point them on the wall and where they are now. They just set up, they have a virtual reality thing, so you can either go through like a room clearing, some other medical evacuation thing, and then, of course, landing on the moon. I did the landing on the moon with my husband the other day to Apollo, and on the Apollo. And they've got a little shooting range thing in there. So there's guys that volunteer just to show the shooting range. So, of course, I went up. He's like, do you have any experience? I'm like, my husband takes me here and there. I have a lot of work to do, but he saw how I picked it up. He saw it. He's like, oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. You've got some. And my husband's right. I'm like, yeah, he's a retired Marine. He showed me a few things.
A few things here and there.
So, and then they have also, what do they call it? The landing craft. You could do virtual reality flight school flying. So they have
the simulators.
Flight simulator. Thank you. And so they have the vets that are volunteering all sitting there, and it's so cute. I mean, some of them are in their like 80s and 90s. Some have flown, some not, but they want to work in that space, or they've invested money in that space to donate. So this is their baby. And they have a pointer, and they're like, what do you want to fly? So you could fly a helicopter all the way to, my husband picked a fighter jet. and they take you on a 20-minute simulation thing, and you've got the pedals there, and they're telling you what buttons to press, and you're taking off from a runway, and fascinating. But yeah, I'm spending more and more time there, and I got my husband, and he's like, you know what, this is actually a pretty cool place. They have a theater where they do concerts and events. We just had a Vietnam veterans ceremony, so I was a part of that. They do colors. They have the mayor came and did a presentation. So this is a public space that it's a nonprofit, and they've been working on building it for like the last 5 years. They used to be in a different location, so they've expanded now. And the donations that people give to the physical artifacts and stuff, it's amazing too. The uniform donations, the parachute that turned into a wedding dress that had, maps on the back from Vietnam. I mean, crazy stories. Wow. But yeah, that's the space I'm doing. I'm going to be there in November. We're having Veterans Day, and I'm actually going to be running an art theme project where we're going to have an exhibit area outside of the theater where they're going to do the ceremony, and I'm going to be engaging with veterans. I've already talked to the curator. We're going to put it out there to have veterans that want to show love and experience through artwork, so they can paint, they can whatever medium of art they have, they can share it, they can participate in it, they can put it in this pegboards and in the space we're going to have in a hallway. And then after the ceremony, people can come and talk to these veterans about their artwork and gain more insight, and just build the community thing again. I'll be there with my book as well. So the I Love You and I Love Me, again, it's all about self-worth and, honoring yourself. And if you don't love yourself, you can't love other people. So it's about 20 authors in that book. Everybody's got a few pages. There's QR codes, so you can click and hear my voice of speaking. There's visuals, there's pictures. So we got number one in a few categories in Amazon. But this is really important to me, and I'm glad I could write I Love Me. Like, yeah, I want to be a part of that. I love me because I'm rattling it off. There's some people that can't even write that chapter yet. They're working on themselves still. They're like, I'm not loving me. I've got this wrong and this and whatever hang up they have. So we want everybody to get to the stage of I love me, because when you love yourself, you can love other people. You can spread love and light and just show up more alive, show up and thrive in whatever season you are in your life. So that's kind of what's going on with me. I can keep going, but I'm going to take a pause and let you reflect for a second.
Yeah, no, and unfortunately, that takes us to the end of the hour here. A couple of things struck me as you were talking. One of them is when you were putting together, the outings on the boat, and you went to the small businesses and said, "Hey, would you do this or that?" And I think one of the challenges that veterans and people getting out of the military have is they hear how much our fellow citizens support us or support what we're doing, and yet when they get out, they feel like they don't. And I try to explain to them that we need to help our fellow citizens understand how they can help us, because they really don't know. It's not a lack of wanting to. It's just they don't know. They don't inhabit our world. Even now, less than 2% of the American population have ever served in the military ever, and so we have the obligation to sort of help them translate how we can be helped, number one. And number two, we can't go military on them because they don't understand that. It would be like going to China and speaking English. Actually, worse than that, because at least in China they probably understand English. But when we talk to them about MILSPOUSE or this or that, they have no idea the language. It's completely opaque for them. I mean, one of my favorite examples is, after World War II, if you told someone that, oh man, that's a Navy E job, almost everybody knew what that meant, because it was so, people knew that the Navy E was the E for excellence that ships earned. And so it was part of just the gestalt of the times. But you couldn't use that phrase now. People would have no idea what that Navy E. No, Navy is N-A-V-Y.
Enlisted. When I hear E, I hear enlisted. That's because that was my world.
Right, exactly. So we've got to learn to speak civilian. We can't sit back and expect our fellow citizens to learn to
Mm.
speak military. They're just
Mm.
they're not going to, and there's no way for them to really.
Right, right.
So
I love how you bring that up at the end. And I have a resource for you too, actually. They're on LinkedIn, they're on Facebook. It's called Women Who Lead. There's a woman named Kathy Gallowitz. She is the founder of Veteran Vanguard, and that's her mission to help
mhm,
bridge the gap between civilians who might want to help veterans, but they don't know how, and have the veteran perspective. And it's
right.
mainly female military veterans. We've got military spouses in the group like myself, and also just champions for veterans. Those are the civilian
Yeah,
side. And we're actually having
I
a
think I've
summit.
spoken with her at some point.
Okay.
This
Yeah.
Veteran
We'll
Vanguard
put,
rings a bell with me. But you know, we as people who help our military colleagues transition, I think we need to keep that uppermost in our head. So I've related. I haven't related the story in a long time, but I feel like I need to. Back when I first got out of the military, I was helping people transition, and I did a project where I spoke to over 100 either currently serving military people who were transitioning out or people who had already transitioned out. And I was speaking to a Navy chief petty officer one day and kind of going through my questions. And I one of my questions is, what is making it difficult for you to achieve your post-military goals? He said, well, he says, you hear a lot about how civilians want to help us, but they really don't. They don't really care about us. I said, well, why do you think that? And he said, well, they pay a lot of lip service, but when it really comes to helping us, they just don't. And he said they're just a bunch of liars, and he said a lot of horrible things like that. So I said to him, well, let me ask you this: if a civilian person wanted to join the military, and they said, and you were a military recruiter, and they said all sorts of horrible things about the military, would you recruit them? And he said, no, not a chance, wouldn't let him in. And I said, well, so I'm wondering, why should civilians let you into their world when you have such a dim view of civilians? His answer was
whoa.
incredibly telling. He said, because I'm right. Right. And this is a fellow who'd been unsuccessful in transitioning. He'd been at it for three or 4 years, I think, at that point.
Not
And that was
coachable.
why, right? I mean, if we're going to treat our fellow Americans as bad, as liar, whatever we're, well, why would they want to embrace us? I mean, that's
Yeah.
it just makes no sense. So I think we've got to understand that in the end, we still have to help ourselves. It is a weird thing. The military in some ways kind of makes us very dependent because they take care of so much for us, and yet we have to be so strong and so directed. And so we need to continue to be strong and directed without that dependency. We've got to then shoulder that additional burden, and
Independence. Yeah.
and we
That
and become
independence
independent,
again.
like you were talking
I was
about.
just thinking the spouse side, but same for the
Right.
veteran. Yeah.
It's the same. It's kind of a transition. I think children too, by the way, and we didn't really talk about children. That could be a topic for another day. But for children to transition too is very, very difficult, and they get even less attention, I think, than spouses do, who get almost no attention. Right. So it's a very complex subject, but what I think is great is your experience and your ability to articulate how you have succeeded, how you continue to grow and develop, and most especially to keep your marriage vital. I think is an amazing example of that, because a lot of us, I mean, I didn't make it. My marriage fell apart. Not through, frankly, lack of trying on my part, but there were other circumstances that were involved. But it's really hard, and it takes both people to really be committed to it. And if they're not, it's not going to endure. And yet, um, taking a marriage that has lived through the military life and bringing it into the civilian world intact, I think can be the most powerful factor in living a life worth living post-military, if you will, to continue on that journey together. So I really salute you for for accomplishing that, you and your husband. So
appreciate that acknowledgement. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, so that's going to wrap it up for us today, and indeed for this week. And Vanessa, thank you so much for coming back, and hopefully we can kind of check in on a kind of a regular basis, and I'd love to hear how things go with the museum and your Veterans Day celebration and those kind of things. So but yeah, in the meantime, I wish you all the best with that. And by the way, but I'm not going to let you jump off because there's someone I need to connect you to after we sign off. So, but thank you very, very much. So, folks, for all of you who are viewing, thank you for joining us. I'm not even going to say I hope you got something out of it, because I can't imagine you saw this without getting greatly inspired, as well as really hearing what we call in Hebrew the emes, the truth. This is this is the most important thing. Sometimes the truth is hard to hear, but Vanessa really presents it in a way that it just slides into our consciousness and can become part of us moving forward. So I'm sure that happened for you as well. So just real quickly, next week, Monday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, is Trust and Estates Weekly. On Tuesday, 10 a.m. also Pacific time, is Business Lessons from the Military. And then 7 days from today, we'll be back for the next edition of People Making Money. I thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of the day and a terrific rest of the week. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my bell. All the best, folks.